A devastating 7.7 magnitude earthquake has shaken Southeast Asia, leaving destruction and chaos in its wake. Striking near Mandalay, Myanmar, at a shallow depth of just 6 miles. The quake collapsed buildings, sparked fires at the University of Mandalay, and triggered panic across the region. Just 11 minutes later, a 6.4 magnitude aftershock compounded the crisis. Myanmar's military junta, rarely open to international appeals, has declared a state of emergency and urgently called for global aid, a stark indicator of the disaster's severity. Meanwhile, over 300 miles away in Bangkok, Thailand, skyscrapers swayed violently, forcing evacuations and leaving residents in shock. Eyewitnesses describe scenes of water cascading from rooftops, collapsing construction sites, and streets filled with terrified crowds. As rescue teams scramble to save lives and hospitals overflow, fears of more aftershocks loom. Welcome to 84 Volt's latest news, your go-to channel for breaking updates on culture, politics, and society's most pressing stories. We cut through the noise to bring you accurate, timely reporting from hotspots around the globe. From natural disasters to geopolitical shifts, we're here to keep you informed and engaged. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you never miss a critical update. Join our growing community of viewers who rely on 84 Volts to stay ahead of the curve. Your subscription fuels our mission to deliver unfiltered news, straight to your screen. Now, let's dive deeper into today's unfolding tragedy. In Myanmar, entire neighborhoods lie in ruins. Temples and mosques, centuries-old symbols of resilience, have crumbled. Social media footage reveals survivors sifting through debris, while hospitals in Naypyidaw struggle to cope with the influx of injured. The military regime's rare plea for help underscores a grim reality. This disaster may be far deadlier than initially feared. In Bangkok, where earthquakes are virtually unheard of, the quake's reach has left experts baffled. Office workers recount gripping tales of survival, like Sebastian Wolf, who filmed the chaos from the 20th floor as water surged from a rooftop pool and a nearby building collapsed. Though visible damage here is limited, the psychological toll is immense. Authorities continue to inspect structures, urging caution as aftershock risks persist. Stay with us as we track rescue efforts, analyze regional vulnerabilities, and bring you exclusive interviews from the ground. This is 84 Volt's latest news, where the story doesn't end at the headline. A catastrophic earthquake has plunged Myanmar into chaos, with the military junta declaring a state of emergency as rescue operations face immense challenges. The 7.7 magnitude quake, centered near Mandalay, has left critical infrastructure in ruins. Historic mosques and temples, cornerstones of cultural and spiritual life, have crumbled. While the University of Mandalay, a hub of education, was engulfed in flames shortly after the initial tremor. These collapses have not only erased landmarks but also disrupted communal spaces where residents gather for worship, education, and solidarity. Rescue teams, already stretched thin due to limited resources and political instability, are racing against time to reach survivors trapped under debris. Reports indicate severe shortages of heavy machinery, medical supplies, and trained personnel, exacerbating the crisis. In rural areas, access is further hindered by damaged roads and landslides triggered by the quake. Local volunteers, armed with little more than shovels and bare hands, are digging through rubble in desperate attempts to save lives. Just 11 minutes after the main quake, a powerful 6.4 magnitude aftershock rattled the region, compounding fears of additional destruction. Seismologists warn that such aftershocks could persist for days, destabilizing already fragile structures and hampering rescue efforts. The repeated tremors have forced many residents to flee their homes, seeking refuge in open fields or makeshift camps, where they face exposure to heavy rains and dwindling supplies of food and clean water. Hospitals in Naypyidaw, the capital, are overwhelmed. Medical staff describe scenes of chaos as hundreds of injured flood into overcrowded facilities. Hallways are lined with patients, many suffering from crush injuries, fractures, and trauma. With power outages and limited generators, surgeries are being conducted by flashlight, and critical medications are running low. The junta's rare appeal for international aid underscores the severity of the crisis, a stark admission from a regime that has long isolated itself from global scrutiny. The call for help has drawn responses from organizations like the United Nations and Red Cross. But logistical hurdles loom. Myanmar's restrictive policies, including visa barriers and censorship, complicate the entry of foreign aid workers and equipment. Satellite imagery reveals widespread damage in remote villages. Yet communication blackouts have left families anxiously awaiting news of loved ones. In Mandalay, survivors recount harrowing escapes from collapsing buildings, while others mourn those lost under the rubble. As night falls, the lack of electricity and safe shelter heightens risks of disease outbreaks and further casualties. Communities are banding together, sharing meager resources and erecting temporary shelters from tarps and bamboo. Meanwhile, the junta's prioritization of military-controlled areas for aid distribution has sparked accusations of neglect in ethnic minority regions, deepening existing tensions. The earthquake's toll extends beyond physical destruction. It has exposed systemic vulnerabilities in Myanmar's infrastructure and governance, amplified by years of political turmoil. For a population already grappling with economic collapse and repression, this disaster is a devastating blow. International observers urge swift, unimpeded aid access to prevent further loss of life, emphasizing that time is critical. As the world watches, the people of Myanmar brace for a long and arduous road to recovery. A rare and violent earthquake sent shockwaves through Bangkok, Thailand's bustling capital, leaving residents in disbelief and triggering scenes of chaos in a city unaccustomed to seismic upheaval. The tremor, originating from a 7.7 magnitude quake in Myanmar, rattled high-rise buildings, shattered glass facades, and caused a partially constructed skyscraper to collapse in the heart of the city. The disaster has exposed vulnerabilities in urban infrastructure and tested the emergency response capabilities of a metropolis better known for flooding than fault lines. For Bangkokians, the quake was a surreal and terrifying experience. Office workers in towering commercial hubs described sudden, violent swaying, some comparing it to being on a ship in a storm. Panic erupted as ceiling tiles crashed down, elevators stalled, and emergency alarms blared. In the upscale Sukhumvit district, a luxury high-rise's rooftop pool overflowed, sending water cascading down 30 stories like a waterfall. As captured in viral footage, it felt like the building was going to snap, said Sebastian Wolf, a German expat who was working on the 20th floor of an office tower. People were screaming, running for the stairs. I've been through earthquakes before, but nothing like this. The collapse of a 45-story construction site in the Chatuchak district became one of the most harrowing incidents. Dozens of workers were trapped under twisted steel and concrete when the unfinished structure buckled. Rescue teams, armed with cranes and thermal imaging equipment, worked through the night to locate survivors. We heard cries for help deep inside the rubble, but the site is too unstable to send people in, said Lieutenant Somchai Vongsa, a first responder. By dawn, 5 bodies had been recovered, and at least 12 workers remained missing, their families clinging to hope under makeshift tents nearby. Bangkok's emergency services scrambled to manage the fallout. Over 200 structural engineers and inspectors fanned out across the city to assess damage, prioritizing hospitals, schools, and transit systems. Preliminary reports revealed cracks in aging condominiums, tilting lamp posts, and ruptured water pipes in older neighborhoods. The BTS SkyTrain, a lifeline for commuters, was halted for hours as engineers checked tracks for warping. Meanwhile, hospitals treated over 300 patients for injuries ranging from broken bones to cardiac arrests triggered by panic. The psychological toll on residents was palpable. Thousands opted to sleep in parks, parking lots, and open-air markets, fearing aftershocks. Vendors distributed free water and snacks, while monks from nearby temples set up temporary shelters. No one wants to go back inside, said Narirat Chayapurn, a mother of 2 camping in Lumpini Park. Every little tremor makes us jump. We'll stay here until they say it's safe. Authorities urged caution but emphasized that most modern buildings, constructed under Thailand's stringent seismic codes enacted after the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, had withstood the shaking. Yet the disaster raised uncomfortable questions. Why did the Chatuchak construction site fail? Early investigations pointed to rushed deadlines and possible corner cutting on materials. This was a wake-up call, said Dr. Precha Thaviran, a civil engineering professor at Chulalongkorn University. Bangkok isn't on a major fault line, but today proved we can't ignore resilience. The government announced a citywide audit of all high-rise projects, vowing to penalize violations. Thailand's meteorological department confirmed the quake was the strongest felt in Bangkok in over a century. Seismologists attributed the intensity to the tremor's shallow depth, just 6 miles, and the city's soft sedimentary soil. which amplified vibrations. While aftershocks have diminished, experts warn that repaired buildings could hide latent damage. Cracks in foundations or compromised load-bearing walls might not be visible yet, warned Dr. Thavern. As night fell on the second day, the city remained eerily quiet. Offices closed early, and neon-lit streets normally packed with tourists stood empty. For Bangkok, a hub of resilience famed for its "Mai Pen Rai, never mind" spirit, the quake was a humbling reminder of nature's power. Recovery will take weeks, but the camaraderie amid crisis, a blend of resourcefulness and compassion, has already become the defining story of this unprecedented event. The earthquake's catastrophic impact stemmed from a combination of geological, geographic, and human factors. At its core, the tremor's shallow depth, just 6 miles beneath the surface, played a pivotal role. Unlike deeper quakes, whose energy dissipates as seismic waves travel upward, this event concentrated violent shaking directly into the densely populated regions above. The result was amplified ground motion, likened to a bomb detonating beneath the earth, according to seismologists, which shattered buildings, roads, and pipelines with brutal efficiency. Mandalay, Myanmar's cultural and economic hub, bore the brunt as the epicenter. Home to over 1.3 million people, the city's aging infrastructure, including centuries-old temples, brick-and-mortar homes, and poorly regulated modern constructions, crumbled under the force. Many structures lacked reinforced steel or earthquake-resistant designs, a critical oversight in a region historically prone to seismic activity. The collapse of landmarks like the University of Mandalay not only symbolized cultural loss but also severed access to education and emergency coordination centers. Meanwhile, rural villages surrounding the city, built with fragile materials like bamboo and thatch, were flattened within seconds, leaving survivors with no shelter. In Bangkok, located over 400 miles from the epicenter, the prolonged shaking, lasting more than a minute, defied expectations. The city sits on a stable continental plate, far from major fault lines, and its high rises are engineered to withstand typhoons, not earthquakes. However, the shallow quake's energy traveled efficiently through the soft sedimentary basin beneath Bangkok, a geological feature that acted like an amplifier. Skyscrapers swayed violently, triggering panic in a population unprepared for such an event. It felt like the ground turned to liquid. One resident recounted, the extended duration of the tremors exacerbated psychological trauma, with many fearing a total collapse even after the shaking ceased. Urban density magnified the crisis. In Mandalay, narrow streets clogged with debris slowed rescue efforts, while in Bangkok, the sheer number of high rises, over 1,000 buildings taller than 20 stories, made mass evacuations chaotic. Experts warn that climate change and rapid, unregulated urbanization in Southeast Asia are creating time bombs for future disasters. This quake, a stark reminder of nature's unpredictability, underscores the urgent need for resilient infrastructure and public preparedness in regions once deemed low risk. The global humanitarian community has launched a rapid mobilization to assist earthquake-ravaged Myanmar. But efforts are being severely hampered by the military junta's restrictive policies. Organizations such as the United Nations, Red Cross, and Médecins Sans Frontières, MSF, are coordinating airlifts of critical supplies, including food, emergency shelter, and medical kits, to address the escalating crisis. The UN estimates over 200,000 people are in urgent need of aid, with thousands displaced and entire villages reduced to rubble. Yet, access remains a formidable challenge. The junta, which seized power in 2021 and faces widespread international condemnation, has imposed bureaucratic hurdles, including delayed visa approvals for foreign aid workers and stringent oversight of relief distribution. Every hour of delay costs lives, said Martin Griffiths, UN Under-Secretary for Humanitarian Affairs. During a press briefing, reports indicate that only 30% of requested aid convoys have reached the hardest-hit areas, such as Mandalay and rural Shan State. Military checkpoints routinely divert shipments to government-controlled zones, sidelining ethnic minority regions that suffered catastrophic damage. Satellite imagery reveals vast stretches of destruction in Karenni and Kachin states, where local volunteer networks, operating with minimal resources, are digging through debris without heavy machinery or medical support. Diplomatic tensions further complicate the response. Western nations, including the US and EU members, have cautiously pledged funds but remain wary of bypassing sanctions imposed on the junta. Meanwhile, regional allies like Thailand and India are facilitating cross-border aid corridors, though these routes are plagued by logistical bottlenecks and monsoon rains. China, a key junta ally, has dispatched emergency teams but faces criticism for prioritizing infrastructure projects over grassroots relief. The junta's rare appeal for international assistance, while unprecedented, has been met with skepticism. Aid groups report strict surveillance, with authorities demanding lists of beneficiaries and barring independent assessments. We're forced to negotiate access street by street, an MSF coordinator shared anonymously. Even ambulances are stopped for security checks. Such restrictions have left hospitals in Naypyidaw overwhelmed, with surgeons performing procedures by flashlight and reusing gloves. The clock is ticking. With monsoon season approaching, displaced families camped in open fields face heightened risks of waterborne diseases and malnutrition. Over 50% of Myanmar's health facilities are damaged or non-functional, and UNICEF warns of a lost generation if schools remain unrepaired. Local NGOs, operating clandestinely, are filling gaps by smuggling supplies through informal networks, but their reach is limited. International leaders are urging the junta to prioritize humanitarian imperatives over politics. Natural disasters know no borders or ideologies, said ASEAN Secretary General Kao Kim Horn. Yet, without unimpeded access, the death toll, already estimated in the thousands, will rise. The world watches, hoping diplomacy can unlock a lifeline for Myanmar's suffering millions. As rescue teams battle time and rubble across Myanmar and Thailand, the true scale of this disaster remains uncertain. What we do know is this: thousands are homeless, hospitals are overwhelmed, and the world's response could mean the difference between life and death. For survivors like those in Mandalay or Bangkok's shaken skyscrapers, recovery will take months, if not years. Stay vigilant with 84 Volt's latest news. Hit the like button if this report informed you, and share your thoughts below. How should the global community balance aid with political tensions in crises like this? Let's discuss. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell. Our team is on the ground, and we'll bring you updates as this story evolves. For extended coverage, including survivor interviews and expert analysis, check out our playlist linked below. To the people of Southeast Asia, our hearts are with you. To our viewers, thank you for trusting 84 Volts to keep you informed. Stay safe, stay curious, and remember, knowledge is your first line of defense.